afternoon, everybody around the world, and welcome to a very special version of our Sunset Safari, and a particular welcome to the students of Landstown High School, and to Miss Daniel's class in particular. Welcome to our SafariLIVE, where essentially we bring you a live safari twice a day, every day, bringing you some of the most incredible stories of animals around Africa. Now, a little bit about how it works before I go into the detail of this hyena that we were looking at. My name is Jamie. This afternoon I have VM on camera with me, so essentially we go out in our Land Rovers with a camera on the back and a fantastic cameraman who helps us bring you these incredible images. They get broadcast up into a satellite in the sky and fed across the world. Now, what we are attempting to do here is really bring you some incredible stories and applications of South Africa's wildlife. So at the moment, I'm sitting on a place on a reserve called Djuma, and we operate on Djuma and Arathusa game reserves, and I'm sure that your teachers will be able to show you a map, and you'll be able to have a look at roughly where we are. But essentially, we fall into a private reserve made up of different constituent pieces of land known as the Sabi Sands, and the Sabi Sands is open to a wildlife area known as the Greater Kruger National Park Reserve. That is essentially a piece of untapped wilderness that's been going for the last 100, or in a protected area for the last 100 or so years. And it's 4 million hectares of wild space. 4 million hectares, essentially 4 million football fields or soccer fields, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, the reason that I brought you here today and to a very special place, to animals that I'm particularly exceptionally fond of, I wanted to bring you through to the hyena den. I'm incredibly glad. For us, it is 2:30 in the afternoon. For you guys in Virginia Beach, it is apparently 7:30 in the morning. But I'm exceptionally glad that today has proved to be an overcast day. Since the last few days, we've had temperatures of around close to 40 to 45 degrees centigrade, which, to put that into a perspective, is well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit every day. Luckily for us, the weather has been exceptionally cooperative, which means that we get to view one of the nocturnal species that you might not always get to see. And the reason I thought that a spotted hyena for you would be fascinating is because we get to see a spotted hyena, which is an animal that is dominated by females, with females essentially being bigger and stronger. They have exceptionally high levels of what's known as androgen, which is the male hormone, androgen and testosterone, which makes them bigger and stronger and more dominant to the males. They also come with their own complexity of animal behavior and hierarchy in their social caste system, which is fascinating. And still to this day, and one of the things that I'd like to bring to you is the fascination of our world. To this day, we still don't know everything there is to know about these incredible animals. Scientists who've been researching them for 40 years still don't fully understand exactly how they operate. But the nice thing about this particular den site, they haven't come out to play yet, but there are some brand new cubs. The hyenas have been incredibly successful. Now, on this overcast day, with all this greenery around, what I'm going to tell you next might seem a little bit ridiculous, but South Africa has been in the grips of the most phenomenal drought. We've hardly had any rain for the last 2 years. Generally, this area should average about 550 mils of rain in 1 year. We've had less than 100 in our wet season. Our dams have dried up across the area, and Eric Moore was wondering, how has this affected the animals in this particular drought? Are some of them leaving? Are some of them moving around? Now, I said that the spotted hyenas have done particularly well because animals are concentrated around pumped dams, and I know that probably James will talk a little bit more about dam pumping and the way in which it impacts the animals in particular. The animals are starting, particularly bulk grazers, are starting to suffer in that they are losing condition. They cannot get the nutrients that they need. Luckily for us, in this wide open area, they can walk across to where there's rivers and maybe a little bit better in the way of nutritional value to the grasses and the trees. So yes, Eric, a lot of the animals are affected in different ways. We've noticed with the elephants, we're getting much more concentrated herds of elephants for some reason. That's because I think they're restricted to where they can actually have access to water. But elephants, of course, are able to feed predominantly in this time of year on trees rather than grasses, and at least the trees still carry some nutrition. But if you compare them to the herds of buffalo that we've been seeing, When I first started working here last year, there were 400, 500 buffalo strong in one herd. At the moment, we're seeing herds of about 100, 200, so they're already starting to fragment. The predators, on the other hand, and predators include the spotted hyena, they fall right up there as a keystone predator and one of the best hunters out here. They have actually been exceptionally positively influenced by this drought. And the reason I say that is because the animals that they prey on are now concentrated around water sources. They're forced to go to different water sources or to use the same water sources. It means the predators don't have to cover such huge distances to get to water. An exceptionally interesting animal, but I think it's time for us to move on in our short period of time, find what else we can find you. In the meantime, I believe that Mr. James Henry is out as well. Let's find out what he has to say.
Good afternoon to all of you there at Landstown College. I think you're in Florida, in Virginia Beach. Sounds like a marvelous place to be. My name is James Henry, and that there, of course, is a European bee-eater. You wouldn't have known that. And there are a number of things around this waterhole, this little pan that we're having a look at here. You're welcome, please, to send any questions about what we're going to see over the course of the next little while. Like I say, my name is James Henry. On camera today we have Brian, 6'4" of him. He is a large hunk of South African meat. Now, the other thing that we have here are some hippopotamus, 2 of them, and they're sitting in a pan, which is a sort of natural, well, essentially a pan is a natural waterhole. This is not a natural waterhole, this is a pumped waterhole. And these hippo are living in what is suboptimal habitat. They would ideally be in a river somewhere where they could set up a territory. They're young bulls, so probably not quite at the age where they're able to set up a territory yet, and they wouldn't normally be in such a small body of water. Now, Hi, I think that's how we say your name, H-A-I. You want to know what happens if the animals start attacking each other. Do we interfere, or do we keep broadcasting? It's all part of nature. Hi, we definitely keep broadcasting. In fact, we broadcast extra if they start attacking each other. Anything that is a natural interaction between the species here, we absolutely will broadcast. That's half of what is so fascinating about what we do out here. And of course, the predator-prey interaction that goes on here. The predator-prey reactions that do go out here are some of the most fascinating things that happen. Now, what I would also like you to look at, there's a hippo there and there's a warthog. Now, the warthog, of course, is one of 2 pig species that we get here. The main one, we have apparently got bush pig here. I've never seen one. But the warthog is the main pig species. That's a big boar, and he has just chased off a whole lot of impala, the most common antelope species here. And I'm sure that some of you will be wondering what on earth an antelope is, especially as you don't get them there where you are. You get deer. That's the sort of evolutionary equivalent of what we have here. We have antelope. They're all part of the same order, and that is the order Ruminatia, or the ruminants, which of course the most common representative would be a cow. Now, there was something else I wanted to show you, but they've flown off. We had some oxpeckers here, and they are the birds, very famous birds, that sit upon animals eating ticks. Now, Mr. Swift, you want to know if any other species struggle from poaching, the scourge of poaching, or was it just rhino? Mr. Swift, that is a complicated question. It's a very good question. Basically, what happens is we are in an area where we're in a game reserve, but we're surrounded by very poverty-stricken villages, which means there are people living there. There's an up to 70% unemployment rate in some of those villages. This means that people are hungry. So what you define as poaching becomes a conflicted and difficult question to answer. So yes, other species do get hunted illegally from the reserve, which by the strictest definition is poaching. But I'm not sure that you can classify somebody who comes in to steal the odd impala to feed his family in the same way as you can classify somebody who will shoot a rhino, or perhaps an elephant for their ivory or for their horn, depending on which species it is. So yes, there is poaching. There are incursions from those villages. Does it make an appreciable difference to most of the other wildlife? No, it doesn't make a huge difference to the numbers of wildlife. Do we need to stop it? Of course we do. Do we need to find a solution for those poor people living on outside game reserves, especially in Africa? Absolutely we do. And the game reserve will hopefully one day be a part of that solution. Now, Damien, while we sit here, we'll sit here a little bit longer and then we'll press on. You want to know about some of the endangered species that live in the reserve? Well, rhino, I suppose, would be considered the most obvious endangered species that we have here. Then we have Africa's equivalent of the wolf, and that is called the painted dog or African hunting dog, and that is an endangered species. Only about, probably about 2,000 left in the world. And then we also have the black rhino. Of course, there are fewer than 4,500 of them left in the world, so very few of those. And then on the bird side of things, we've got things like a ground hornbill. They're endangered species. I've no doubt also that there are a number of endangered amphibians and reptiles that we don't even know about at this stage, and no doubt any number of endangered invertebrate species that haven't even been described. So there are quite a few of them. The last thing I want to show you here is in this pan, in this waterhole where the two hippo are lying looking a bit sad, are some terrapins. Now, I don't know if you get terrapins in Virginia Beach, but a terrapin is a freshwater turtle, if you like, for want of a better term. And there are a couple of them in there. You just can see their heads sticking out of the water now and again. And what they do is they're ostensibly meat eaters, and they'll eat little invertebrates that come into the water. They'll sometimes grab the odd unsuspecting bird that comes to have a drink. But what they also do, they act like the oxpeckers of the water. They will crawl around the hippo and they'll pick the ticks and other ectoparasites off the hippo's skin as the hippo lie there. So that's quite an interesting thing that happens there. And that, of course, as you will well know, is known as a, Brian?
Symbiotic relationship.
Symbiotic relationship. Well done. Okay, let's move on slowly. See what else we can see. We don't have very long with you today, so we know try and maximize our time. I'm going to drive around there and see if we can't get a slightly better view of those impala, and let's talk about those for a little while. Of course, hello JT, you want to know if there's some kind of species or any animal that dominates our current sort of food chain? No, JT, I think you'll find that, as with most ecological systems, there is I'm sure you've come across the concept of a niche, and a trophic niche or a food niche is the niche into which the different animals fit. So no animal can dominate any other really here, otherwise they wouldn't be able to survive. Everybody's got their own little thing that they eat. So I mean, a brilliant example of that would be two hornbill species. We've got a red-billed hornbill and a yellow-billed hornbill, which to the untrained eye look almost identical, but for the colour of their bills. There's a little swallow. So when I talk about the hornbills, JT, but because the bill is a very subtly different size, on the yellow bill it's slightly bigger than the red bill, they don't eat the same thing, right? So it goes the same with the rest of the animals out here. I suppose in a time like this, when the drought is so severe, the animal that might be considered to affect the most the rest of the animals would be an elephant, which of course would destroy, or I mean, I use the term destroy advisedly. An elephant, of course, would use a lot of vegetation, and that will affect what other animals are able to eat. In times of plenty, though, everybody has their own sort of trophic niche. They do overlap each other, of course, but generally, the animals fit into a little niche where they can eat what they need to eat. Let's head back across to Jamie. She's still with those hyenas, and I'll catch up with you a bit later.
And here is one of our tallest, in fact, the tallest mammal in the entire animal kingdom, the South African giraffe. The reason that I specify that it is a South African giraffe is because there are several different subspecies throughout Africa. Definitely one of the animals that's going to show more resilience to this drought. You're looking at a female at the moment, a slightly camera-shy female, but a female nonetheless. Those light-colored spots. The difference between the male and female is usually fairly clear in the obvious mammalian ways, but also those tufted horns on the top of her head, known as ossicones, are much smaller and covered in fur compared to the males. Now that I'm looking, I've actually spotted another giraffe that's going to move, another female that's going to move across in front of your screen, and we might be in luck. They could well be heading towards the Djuma Pan, which is another one of our pumped water holes, on their way to go and have a drink. You might get lucky enough to see the way in which giraffes get to drink. And as they start to move behind the trees, I'm going to try and reposition to get you a view of the last one moving across. Mrs. Daniel, you've asked a question about the symbiotic relationships of the animals within the reserve, and there are so many, too many for me to even begin to count, but something I'm specifically looking for to show you is one of the most fascinating examples of a symbiotic relationship, and that's the type of bird that will be sitting on some of these, or should be sitting on some of these giraffes. Just going to poke my nose in here. Hello, ladies. Miss Daniel, the reason I wanted to raise this, and I don't see any of them sitting on these three females at the moment, but very often giraffe are accompanied by birds known as oxpeckers. Now, oxpeckers are birds specially designed for sitting on the backs of giraffe and other large mammal species and picking off the ticks. One oxpecker, and they're tiny little birds, about the size of, I'm trying to think of an American bird example, probably about the size of a magpie, just smaller than a crow. And they can eat about 1,000 ticks in one day, and that's just one bird. And the giraffe and the other mammal species are absolutely covered in the blood-sucking parasites. And just have a look at the female on the left. She is heavily pregnant. I've only just noticed that now, that round belly compared to the other one. There you can see the ticks clustered around underneath her tail. And you can imagine that can weaken an animal like a giraffe, and the oxpeckers come along and they actually help the animals to remove them, because when you don't have fingers, it can be a very tricky thing. The interesting thing about the relationship with oxpeckers is in that case it's an example of a beneficial symbiotic relationship, an example of mutualism where both species benefit. But if the giraffe has a scratch or an injury of some kind, the oxpeckers also feed on blood and mucus, and they will peck away at that wound and that injury and keep it from closing and from healing, and often increase the chances of bacterial infection. So in a way, almost acting as a parasitic animal on the giraffe. And looking at this lovely light-colored giraffe, she's a very attractive female. Mrs. Daniel would also like to know, can you tell the difference between individual giraffe based on their markings? And yes, just like our spotted hyena friend, oh, she's doing a pregnancy waddle there through the bushes. Just like our spotted hyena friend and the leopards on the reserve, each and every giraffe is completely uniquely patterned. Generally speaking, the females are lighter in color than the males, and usually they darken, all giraffe, whether they are males and females, darken with age, but they'll always have a unique spot pattern that is completely the same to them. It's one of the things that helps their calves to bond with them, apart from their sense of smell, as well as the calls between the mother and the calf. Now, giraffe are one of those creatures that don't have a set herd pattern, and they're not territorial in any way. So in answer to Caleb's question, yes, some animals are territorial, and they will move about in their set areas, but some animals are nomadic, as Caleb was asking, and a giraffe is a perfect example. Generally, they have home ranges, which means an area that they are used to moving about in. But we do get a combination of, for example, elephants and giraffe that are hugely nomadic. Some certain individual cheetah will also cover enormous distances and possibly never even return to a place that they used to inhabit. But yes, it just depends on the type of animal species and the way in which its herd is structured. I'm going to go and see what other fascinating creatures I can find. Let's find out what Mr. Hendry's found for you.
Now, just underneath that tree, which is called an apple leaf tree, or Philonopta violacea, which you don't need to remember, are two of the Africa's smallest carnivores, and they are called dwarf mongoose. Now, a dwarf mongoose is a little mongoose, obviously the smallest representative of the family that we have here, and they knock about on this clearing eating small invertebrates and eggs, and they might even eat small snakes. Mongoose, of course, are very famous for eating snakes. And they've got quite an interesting relationship with the bird behind them, which is a hornbill, and I was talking to you a little bit earlier about the hornbill. That one is a red-billed hornbill. Is it, Brian? I can't even see. No, it's a yellow-billed. It's a young yellow-billed hornbill. Its beak is yellow, therefore it is the yellow-billed hornbill, and it's most famously known, of course, as the Zazu bird. Zazu being from the Lion King, of course, and Izazu is a Zulu word meaning the wise man, which he wasn't in the movie or the play. Now, the bird and those mongoose have an interesting relationship where the bird seems to play a watchman's role while the mongoose are about the place fossicking about for invertebrates and digging up bits and pieces to eat. So that hornbill will often sit above them and alarm call if something comes along, and likewise the mongoose will alarm call if they see something like perhaps an eagle in the sky which might harm the hornbill, and they seem to warn each other of impending doom, as it were. And that's a very interesting relationship that they have with each other. Now, as you spread her out, as you look around this clearing, you can see that there is no grass on it at all. That greenery you can see is just sort of pioneer vegetation that's only just managing to hang on during the course of what is the worst drought in recorded history of this area. Started keeping rain and temperature records in 1904. It's now, of course, 2016. So in 112 years, there has never been a worse drought than we have now. Now, Jamie's got some striped ponies with her. Let's go across there. I'll carry on and see what else I can find.
Indeed, some striped ponies, or as they are properly termed, plain zebra, to show you, in this case, a little foal hiding in the bushes. Now just have a look as VM zooms out at how cryptically those stripes manage to camouflage them. Now this is one of those fascinating things about the world that I get to inhabit, and one of those things that I hope will spark interest within all of you. Nobody knows why zebra have stripes. I'm sure that many of you have always assumed or have been told that zebra stripes are a form of camouflage. That is true to an extent. They certainly act as disruptive colouring, and that was always the accepted theory for many, many decades. But now evolutionary biologists are starting to wonder why, if stripes are such clever camouflage, why then do other animals not have any? Oh, there's a whole herd coming through there. Well spotted, VM. Why is it only the zebra that has adopted this approach? And they've put forward a couple of theories, including one that is temperature control, thermoregulation on hot days out here, where the black stripes heat up faster than the white stripes and create a current of air movement, with cooler moving into hotter and vice versa, and cooling the zebra down in that manner. The other option that has been put forward as a theory is that it disrupts the vision of the flies, things like tsetse flies that carry diseases such as sleeping sickness. There we go. Thank you, zebra. Very dense vegetation through here. Oh, foal's coming in to have a drink. Looks a little bit too old to still be suckling, right at its weaning phase. But yes, the truth is, no matter how many theories we have, whether it's the stripes disrupting the landing vision of insects, meaning that they don't necessarily target zebra as often, the truth is we just don't know exactly why zebras have evolved to have stripes. Now, zebra, as animals go, and you'll notice they're very alert and constantly looking around them as they move towards water. Kate was wondering, what is the highest animal on the food chain that we have? The answer, the apex predator out here, Kate, is a lion. So as animals go, they out-compete. They compete with the other predators and do so incredibly successfully. Sorry, it was a Chase's question about the apex predator. Chase, lions are the apex. There's close competition for second and third place between spotted hyenas and wild dogs. So the animal that we saw earlier, and then the critically endangered wild dog, and that is just a question of numbers. And then below that, in terms of the predator hierarchy, the foal's having a little scratch there on the left. When you don't have thumbs, trees will serve as a really good place to scratch that itch. Need a jolly good rub. Chase, leopards and cheetah fill the other top 5 spots below that in terms of predator hierarchy. But bear in mind, there are lots of different food chains and there are lots of different types of apex predators. So for the birds, something like a martial eagle would be considered to be the top of the food chain in that particular food chain, the largest raptor or bird of prey. I wanted to just give you a little bit of something of a fact and figure in this area, since we are somewhat limited in terms of the time that we have. In the beginning of the 19th century, there were 100 million people in the entire African continent. There are now, as we enter the sort of the second decade of the 21st century, there's over 1 billion of them. And that means that wildlife, pristine wildlife areas like these are of such critical importance. And you happen to be watching one of the largest and one of the best looked after wilderness areas anywhere in the world, where the animals can continue to act as they have for hundreds of thousands of years. But because they are fenced and because they are small, we are constantly learning about the different conservation techniques that we applied. 100 years ago, when the Kruger National Park was started, the conservation practice was to shoot all of the predators. Lions, wild dogs, hyenas, leopards, everything had to go, and that was what they thought was an appropriate conservation technique. Now, 100 years later, we've learned far more, but it's a process that is still ongoing, and I hope that through these drives we'll be able to inspire an interest in conservation and the way in which these animals have evolved. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to say farewell to you for the morning. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And for the last few moments, I'm going to send you back across to James so that he can say goodbye as well. Cheers.
So these are called helmeted guinea fowl, so named for that little helmet that they have, and they live in a flock. You can see as Brian zooms out that there are a whole lot of them. Look like little fat ticks crawling across the clearing here, and they're eating whatever they can find. They're eating seeds if they can find them. They're eating buds off these sort of little herby kind of invader plants that, well, not invader, but pioneer plants that we have here. And they live in a flock like this for protection largely. They alarm call if they see anything nasty coming to get them. Otherwise, they also are what we call communal breeders, and that means that there will probably be one group here, not one group, one pair within the flock that breeds, and the rest of them will just help to raise the young ones. So some of them will be fully grown adults, and some of them will be part of the clutch from this year. They grow very fast, of course. Now, Bella, interesting question about how global warming is affecting this area. Bella, I'm not sure that we're able to tell that yet, but what I can tell you is that it is going to upset the balance of wood to grass. Now, there are two types of plants that we get out here broadly. We get woody plants, which are trees, and then we get herbaceous plants, which are grasses and herbs, like the ones these guinea fowl are trying to eat now. And they have a different physiology completely, and the increased carbon levels in the atmosphere will favor the development of woody plants and not the development of herbaceous plants like grasses. Now, what that means, of course, is that over time there will be an inevitable thickening of the bush, So instead of having sort of fairly open savanna grasslands, you'll find that those will eventually close up. We think, this is all, of course, postulation. We're not sure exactly what will happen, but that will inevitably change the suite of herbivores that live in an area, which will in turn affect the suite of carnivores that live in an area. Grasslands, you'll find that those will eventually close up. We think, this is all, of course, postulation. We're not sure exactly what will happen, but that will inevitably change the suite of herbivores that live in an area, which will in turn affect the suite of carnivores that live in an area. Vegetation will have. Like I say, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and there are so many variables that we're dealing with out here that we're just scratching the surface of understanding. If you think of how many invertebrate species in the world, there are probably millions of them that nobody's described yet. So when we come into an area, the best thing for us to do is to just observe and see and try and understand, and not try and interfere too much, simply because 99% of the time we have no idea what's actually going on in a wild system. These areas have existed for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years before human beings came here. There have been ebbs and flows of predator-prey relationships. It's been a dynamic equilibrium that has changed for millennia and millennia. It's best that we just watch and observe. I had a great time talking to you. I hope you've learned something from Jamie and I. And please keep watching in your spare time, of course, on SafariLIVE, #SafariLIVE on Twitter. You can talk to us, ask us questions, even if we're not at school. You can watch us on YouTube, or you can watch us at WildSafariLive.com, which I think is the Nat Geo feed. Right, we're going to say goodbye to you now, and hopefully we'll talk to you again. Enjoy your school day. I'm glad I didn't have to start school as early as you did. Enjoy it, and we'll catch up with you later. Bye-bye.